Red alarms washed the Nova Systems control room in a violent glow, every monitor screaming the same fatal message. 3 hours. 3 hours of total paralysis. 20 engineers scrambling, failing, drowning in a storm of code they could not control. And then Grant Aldridge, the famously ruthless CTO, slammed his hand against the console and barked, "If you're so smart, fix it now." His voice cracked like thunder. But no one moved. No one could. Because nothing they tried worked. Nothing made sense. This was the kind of failure that destroyed careers. And then, in the doorway, stood a girl no one expected, Ariana Brooks, a food delivery driver, rain still dripping from her jacket after the brutal Seattle downpour. She wasn't supposed to be there, she wasn't supposed to speak, but she did, calmly, almost too calmly. In 3 seconds, she scanned the flashing red code, her eyes narrowing with a dangerous serenity that made the room freeze. "That's a cache memory conflict," she said softly. "You rebooted the primary server without clearing the pending transaction buffer." The entire room went silent, suffocating and stunned. 20 engineers with six-figure salaries stared at a dripping, wet delivery girl as if she had spoken some alien language. Grant scoffed, a bitter laugh slicing through the tension. "You? A delivery driver? I bet you didn't even finish high school. Go drop off your lunches and leave real work to people who understand it." More laughter, more disdain. But Ariana didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply shifted her backpack strap and murmured, "Run the correction. Your system will be back online in exactly 2 minutes." Another silence, heavier, sharper, a silence that tasted like a shocking twist waiting to happen, because no one in that room knew they were witnessing the beginning of a genius underdog story that would shake an entire industry. And if you love stories about injustice flipped into justice, don't forget to subscribe for more. What happened next would rewrite everything they thought they knew about power, brilliance, and who truly deserves a place in the world of technology. The alarms didn't stop. They echoed through the steel belly of Nova Systems like a warning from something ancient, something furious. Engineers rushed between terminals, their voices tangled in fear as lines of code bled across the screens in violent red. This wasn't just a crash. It was a catastrophic failure ripping through the heart of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure, and every second the system stayed down meant another client on the brink of collapse. Grant Aldridge stood at the center of it all, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a kind of rage that made grown men shrink. He had built his reputation on control, on being the smartest person in every room he entered. Yet now, surrounded by 20 engineers who couldn't stop the bleeding, he looked powerless. So when Ariana Brooks, still wearing her soaked delivery jacket, stepped closer to the main console, the entire team reacted as if an intruder had breached a classified facility. She shouldn't have been there, she shouldn't have spoken, but she did, her voice steady against the chaos. "The cache stack didn't clear," she said, tapping the edge of the terminal with a calmness that felt almost unreal in a room drowning in panic. "The transaction buffer is still pushing incomplete requests. Your failover loop is suffocating under duplicated calls." The words landed like lightning. No one else had caught it. Not one of the 20 experts Grant had handpicked for their so-called brilliance. Evan Cho scoffed, crossing his arms. "A delivery girl thinks she's a systems architect now. Adorable." Grant didn't even bother hiding his contempt. "You're out of your depth," he sneered. "You wouldn't understand the system if your life depended on it." Ariana didn't flinch. Her eyes, dark and unnervingly serene, stayed fixed on the screen. Clear the pending buffer and reboot only the primary node. Then wait. Exactly 120 seconds. The room stilled. Her certainty was almost offensive. One engineer hesitated, hands trembling. "Should we try it?" Grant shot him a murderous glare, but fear had already dug its claws into the team. They were out of options. They ran the sequence. The first second passed. Nothing. 10 seconds. Still nothing. Someone muttered that this was pointless. Grant smirked, ready to unleash another insult, and then, at second 40, the lights shifted. At second 60, the red lines began to unravel. At second 80, the system hummed. At second 120, the heart of Nova Systems roared back to life as if it had never fallen. The entire room gasped. Not a gentle gasp, a violent, gut-level shock that ripped through every engineer present. Ariana just exhaled softly, as if she had simply confirmed a prediction she had made hours ago. Grant's face tightened. Rage, embarrassment, fear, all layered beneath a forced grin he hoped no one noticed. But someone did. Everyone did. And as Ariana stepped away, her footsteps quiet but unshakably sure, something inside Grant Aldridge cracked. Not because she had fixed the system, but because she had done what he could not. And nothing terrified him more than knowing he might never understand how. That was the moment his obsession began. Grant Aldridge did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his glass-walled corner office, long after everyone else had gone home, the city lights of Seattle bleeding into the room like cold blue veins. The system was back online. The crisis was over. And yet the humiliation clung to him like a stain he couldn't scrub out. A food delivery driver. A nobody. A girl who walked into his command center dripping rainwater and made him look incompetent in front of his entire team. His ego didn't just bruise, it ruptured. And when Grant Aldridge's pride was wounded, something darker always rose to the surface. He swiveled in his chair, voice low, controlled, dangerous. "Evan," he said, "get me everything on that girl. Everything." Evan Cho hesitated. Even he knew that tone meant trouble. But he nodded, tapping rapidly on his tablet, pulling up databases he wasn't technically supposed to access. A moment later, Ariana Brooks' life unfolded on the screen like a dossier from a surveillance operation. 24 years old, works for 3 delivery apps, lives in South Seattle. Grant leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "South Seattle," he muttered. "Figures." Evan continued, reading down the list. No arrests, no debt except student loans, no connections inside Nova Systems. But here's something weird. She was a computer science major at the University of Washington. High GPA. Dean's List. She dropped out in her 3rd year. Grant let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't amusement. It was contempt sharpened into a blade. One of those overreaching dreamers. People who think genius is enough to climb out of their little neighborhoods. People who mistake ambition for ability, Evan added. Some professors wrote glowing recommendations for her, said she had a mind for systems engineering. One even said she could outperform most graduate students. Grant snapped, "Enough!" His voice cut the air. He stood walking toward the window as if the city itself were a witness to his growing resentment. "She embarrassed me, Evan. In my own control room, in front of 20 people who looked to me for leadership, she made me look like a fool." Evan swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, she may have just guessed right or remembered something from school." Grant turned sharply. "It wasn't a guess. Nobody guesses like that. Not with precision. Not with that kind of confidence." He replayed the moment in his mind. How Ariana didn't flinch. How she stated the solution as if she were the only adult in a room full of children. How the system revived exactly when she said it would. 120 seconds. She spoke like someone who understood the architecture better than he did. That thought was intolerable. Grant pressed his hand against the glass, watching the city lights ripple below. People like her think they can walk into my world and speak as equals. They don't understand the hierarchy. They don't understand their place. Evan tried to offer a neutral suggestion. "Maybe we just let it go." She fixed the issue. "She's not coming back." Grant smiled, but it was a smile without warmth, without soul. "Let it go?" "No, Evan. Someone needs to teach her what happens when she steps out of line. Someone needs to remind her that brilliance without power is meaningless." He turned, eyes cold. "I will make sure she regrets ever opening her mouth." And in that moment a seed was planted, a quiet, poisonous seed that would grow into something far more dangerous than Ariana Brooks could have imagined. The underdog had stood tall, but Grant Aldridge was preparing to strike back. And the power he wielded would not be used gently. Ariana Brooks did not come from a world built for brilliance. She came from the dim back corner of a rundown apartment complex in South Seattle, where the hallway lights flickered like dying stars, and the walls carried every sound the neighborhood tried to forget. At night, when the traffic quieted and the air cooled just enough to feel like mercy, you could hear a single fragile cough echoing from behind her door. Marilyn Brooks, Ariana's mother, had once been a force of nature, but cancer has a way of stealing strength slowly, cruelly, until even breathing sounds like a battle. Ariana grew up listening to that struggle, memorizing its rhythm the way other kids learned nursery songs. And no matter how exhausted she was, no matter how many deliveries she had run that day, she always paused when she heard it, because she knew exactly what it meant. She had traded her lecture halls and computer labs for hospital chairs and part-time jobs the moment doctors said the word malignancy. One sentence was enough to reroute an entire future. Ariana had been one of the top students in the University of Washington's computer science program, a mind professors described as unusually sharp, unusually fast, unusually capable. They saw potential in her that could have pushed the boundaries of modern systems design. But potential doesn't pay medical bills. And so she withdrew from classes, quietly packing up the textbooks she had saved so long to afford. She told her advisor she would return one day. She didn't believe it, not then. The apartment became her world. A mattress on the floor for Marilyn, a desk made from a cardboard box for Ariana, and a second-hand laptop whose fan wheezed louder each month, threatening to quit before she could. Yet every night after she tucked her mother in and made sure the pain medication was within reach, Ariana opened that battered machine and began to type. Slow at first, then faster, then furiously, as if the only way to fight the universe was through lines of code. The glow of the screen lit her face, while the rest of the apartment remained swallowed in shadow. Sometimes her fingers cramped, sometimes the keys stuck, sometimes her exhaustion blurred the characters into meaningless symbols. But she kept going. She learned algorithms by candlelight during power outages. She solved system architecture problems while waiting in hospital lobbies. She debugged functions at 3 a.m. when her shift at the diner ended and Marilyn had fallen asleep again. And somewhere in those endless nights, she built something extraordinary. A route optimization system that delivery drivers could use to cut their travel time, reduce wasted fuel, and avoid dead zones in the city. It was clean, elegant, efficient, more advanced than anything Nova Systems had shipped in years. She didn't release it publicly. She didn't brag. She simply used it for her own deliveries, shaving minutes off every route, squeezing every penny she could to support her mother. She didn't know it yet, but she was performing at a level the industry reserved for names that filled keynote stages and magazine covers. She wasn't just good, she wasn't just gifted. She was operating on a tier no one had ever bothered to see because the world rarely looks for genius in apartments with leaking ceilings and overdue rent. And while the city slept, Ariana's brilliance sharpened itself in the dark, shaped by hardship, carved by necessity. Every line of code was a quiet rebellion. Every solution was a refusal to break. In those nights of struggle and determination, the real Ariana Brooks was born. Not the delivery girl, not the dropout, but the woman who would one day dismantle an empire built on arrogance and force the world to acknowledge a truth it had ignored for far too long. Greatness does not need permission to exist. It only needs a reason to rise. Grant Aldridge moved with the precision of a man who had destroyed people before and felt nothing while doing it. The morning after Ariana embarrassed him, he sat behind his monolithic black desk, fingers steepled, expression carved from granite. His ego had been wounded in front of 20 subordinates, and Grant Aldridge did not allow wounds to heal on their own. He manufactured retribution, quiet, surgical, cruel. He dialed the first delivery app with the same calm he used when approving budget cuts that cost dozens of employees their jobs. "This is Grant Aldridge from Nova Systems," he said, voice polished, corporate, weaponized. "I'm reporting a breach of protocol by one of your drivers. Highly unprofessional behavior, a security concern." He kept his tone firm but measured, the tone of a man used to being believed without question. In minutes, a supervisor assured him they would handle it immediately. He hung up and called the second app, then the third. Each time he escalated the accusation slightly. Inappropriate conduct, unauthorized access, potential threat. None of it was true, and all of it sounded believable, coming from a powerful CTO in a city where tech giants shaped policy through whispers. By lunch, the damage was done. While Grant enjoyed an expensive meal catered to his office, Ariana Brooks stood in her small kitchen, staring at her phone as if it had betrayed her. 3 notifications, 3 suspensions, 3 identical messages using sterile corporate language to tell her that her livelihood had been erased. Her hands trembled as she opened the first one. It didn't say why. It didn't have to. The second message hit harder. The third nearly buckled her knees. In the span of a single afternoon, every income stream she relied on had been severed, coldly, effortlessly, systematically. She swallowed hard, forcing the air to stay in her lungs. Months of scraping by, planning every dollar, scheduling deliveries around her mother's medical appointments, all of it collapsed under the weight of 3 automated emails. She sat at the chipped wooden table, surrounded by bills she had organized the night before, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly no longer made room for her. Marilyn's voice drifted from the bedroom, thin and fragile. "Honey, are you all right?" Ariana blinked the sting from her eyes, pushed down the panic clawing at her chest, and forced her voice steady. "I'm okay, Mom. Just a problem at work. I'll fix it." She stepped into the bedroom and pulled a blanket higher over her mother's shoulders. Marilyn looked up with exhausted worry, as if sensing the storm gathering around her daughter. Ariana offered a small smile she didn't feel, but when she returned to the kitchen, that smile fell away. The weight of injustice pressed against her ribs, making each breath sharp. She picked up her old laptop, the one that overheated every few hours, and placed it on the table like a soldier laying down a weapon. If someone like Grant Aldridge could cut her off from the world with a few phone calls, then relying on that world was no longer an option. She opened the lid. The fan whirred loudly, as if struggling to wake up. Ariana wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared at the blank screen, her reflection faint but resolute. He wanted to destroy her prospects. He wanted her silenced, humiliated, pushed back into the shadows. Instead, he had ignited something fierce, a cold, calculated fire. "Fine," she whispered, almost to herself. "If you want to fight Grant, you're going to get one." And as her fingers began to type, slowly at first and then faster, the shift happened. The delivery driver disappeared. The underestimated dropout vanished. In her place stood the version of Ariana the world had never been given the chance to see. Focused, brilliant, dangerous. She wasn't just developing software that night. She was building a weapon forged from every moment she had been dismissed, every job she had lost, every door she had been told was not for her. And this time, she would not be the one brought to her knees. She would be the one rewriting the rules. Ariana's apartment shifted after that day, as if the walls themselves understood that something irreversible had begun. The quiet, dimly lit kitchen became her war room. The flickering bulb overhead cast long shadows across the peeling linoleum floor. And her battered laptop glowed like a single ember, refusing to die out in the dark. She pulled her hair back, cracked her knuckles, and opened a blank workspace. Not for homework, not for some small side project, for a weapon. Ariana was done playing defense. If the world insisted on treating her like she didn't belong, then she would build something so powerful it would expose exactly who did. Her idea formed with razor-sharp clarity, a vulnerability scanning platform. One that didn't just detect flaws but mapped the entire skeleton of a system and highlighted every weak joint, every hidden break, every point of catastrophic failure. The kind of platform companies would pay fortunes for, the kind of platform Nova Systems claimed to have perfected but never truly had. Ariana shut her eyes and exhaled, letting her mind sift through years of studying system architecture, late-night tutorials, open-source forums, articles she had read on the bus, algorithms she had memorized during hospital visits. Patterns flashed before her like constellations, each one snapping into place with impossible speed. She remembered error codes the way musicians remembered chords. She traced system structures the way artists traced silhouettes. Her thought process had always been precise, fast, intuitive to the point of feeling like instinct. Now, pushed by fear, anger, and necessity, it felt nearly superhuman. Line after line of logic streamed from her fingertips. Her brain registered vulnerabilities faster than she could type them, as if the ghost of every broken system she had ever studied was whispering its secrets into her ear. Hours passed, then days. She slept in shallow bursts, face pressed against her keyboard. Coffee replaced meals, adrenaline replaced sleep. Her hands cramped so often she wrapped them in warm towels between coding sprints. And every morning before she began again, she checked on Marilyn. Her mother's smile was tired, but it held something stronger than pain: faith. One night, after finding Ariana slumped over her laptop, Marilyn placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You were born for something bigger than this, honey. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Ariana didn't cry often, but those words cracked something open inside her, a place she had sealed off long ago to survive. She hugged her mother slowly, careful of the pain, and whispered, "I won't stop, I promise." When she returned to her screen, something had changed. Her movements were sharper, her purpose clearer, the fire in her chest brighter. She wasn't just coding anymore, she was rising. Each line of code was a feather forming along her spine. Each breakthrough added heat beneath her wings. She was rebuilding herself in real time, piece by piece, from ashes she hadn't realized she'd been living in. And if you're still watching, if you believe Ariana deserves justice for what was taken from her, leave a comment to support her and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when she finally takes flight. By the end of 2 weeks, the prototype was alive. Not perfect, but undeniable. A platform so sharp it sliced through security defenses like they were paper. A system that saw everything, predicted everything, understood everything. Ariana stared at the interface glowing on her screen, the culmination of sleepless nights and endless determination. She didn't feel tired. She felt reborn, like the beginning of something colossal was pulsing beneath her fingertips. And in that moment, somewhere across the city, Grant Aldridge had no idea that the girl he thought he had destroyed was crafting the very tool that would one day dismantle his entire empire. The phoenix was rising, and this time she was coming for fire. Grant Aldridge had always been careless with his victories. He liked to savor them out loud, to make sure others heard just how effortlessly he could pull strings that strangled anyone who crossed him. And so, the day after Ariana vanished from the delivery apps, he stood in the executive conference room surrounded by his inner circle, laughing as if he had conquered something worthy of pride. He spoke with smug precision about how easy it had been to shut down her income, how people like her were meant to stay in their lane, how a single phone call from him carried more power than her entire future. Most people in the room laughed along, some out of genuine cruelty, others out of fear. But one person did not laugh. Mina Lee, senior systems engineer, sat in the corner with her tablet open, face neutral, eyes unreadable. She had watched Ariana walk into the control room that day with quiet awe. She had seen the way Ariana recognized the error code instantly, the way she spoke with the certainty of someone who didn't need approval to validate her intelligence. And she had seen the look in Grant's eyes when the system came back to life exactly 120 seconds after Ariana predicted it would. That look wasn't leadership. It was fear dressed as arrogance. So when Grant bragged to the team about burying the girl before she even realized she made a mistake, Mina tapped a discrete icon on her tablet. A red recording dot blinked silently. Every word Grant spoke entered her device, preserved with perfect clarity. She didn't know exactly why she was doing it, only that watching someone with real talent be crushed by a man whose ego outweighed his integrity made something deep inside her twist painfully. That night, while the rest of Nova Systems slept soundly under the illusion of corporate loyalty, Mina sat alone in her apartment. She replayed Grant's words. Each sentence sharpened her conviction. She found Ariana's profile through one of the delivery platforms. The account was suspended, but the contact field was still visible. With a deep breath, Mina typed a message. "Ariana, this is Mina. I work at Nova Systems. I know what Grant did to you. I have proof. We need to talk." For a full hour, there was no response. Then a single reply. "When and where?" Mina suggested a small coffee shop tucked at the edge of Capitol Hill, a place quiet enough to be private and busy enough to look normal. Ariana arrived first, hood pulled low, eyes sharp but tired. She scanned the room before sitting. When Mina walked in, she approached slowly, hands visible, as if meeting someone who had every reason not to trust her. "You really work for Nova Systems?" Ariana asked. Mina nodded and slid her tablet across the table. The recording played. Grant's voice filled the air like poison. By the time it ended, Ariana's jaw had tightened, but her eyes were steady, steadier than Mina expected. "There's more," Mina said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a printed list of Nova Systems' largest corporate clients, each one reliant on Nova Systems' infrastructure, each one vulnerable in ways they didn't even know. Ariana lifted her gaze slowly. "Why are you helping me?" Mina hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "Because 3 years ago, Grant tried to fire me after I corrected him during a client meeting. The only reason I survived was because I had a union rep and a good lawyer. You didn't, and because what he did to you was personal, not professional." Ariana absorbed the words, the list, the recording, the intent. Something shifted between them, not sympathy, alignment, a shared understanding of how dangerous unchecked power could be. Mina extended her hand across the table. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." Ariana looked at her for a long moment before taking her hand. The grip was firm, unwavering. A pact formed between them in that modest coffee shop, not written, not spoken aloud, but undeniable. A justice pact. Two women underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside by the same man, now standing on the same side of a line he should never have drawn. And from that moment on, Grant Aldridge was no longer facing a girl he thought he could silence. He was facing a team, a strategy, a storm quietly gathering strength. And this time, it wouldn't be Ariana who was caught unprepared. It would be him. Ariana moved with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Once she and Mina formed their alliance, her plan shifted from survival to strategic retaliation, the kind of retaliation that didn't rely on rage, but on brilliance so sharp it could carve through an entire corporate giant without leaving a fingerprint. She created a new digital identity, clean and untraceable. Kay Brooks, a cybersecurity consultant offering free vulnerability audits to enterprise companies across the Pacific Northwest. No profile picture, no resume, just results. And in the world of high-stakes tech, results speak louder than credentials ever could. The first company to respond was PrimeLogic Industries, a massive logistics corporation that relied heavily on Nova Systems infrastructure. Their CTO requested a review casually, assuming it would be a quick scan from an overeager junior analyst. Instead, what they received 18 hours later was a comprehensive, blistering security audit that laid bare vulnerabilities so severe they bordered on catastrophic. The report detailed root exploits, authentication bypasses, race conditions, and a chain of cascading failures waiting to detonate. PrimeLogic's executives were stunned. They were outraged. But most importantly, they were terrified. Because every flaw, every oversight, every structural weakness came from Nova Systems' own systems. Systems Grant Aldridge had insisted were flawless. The first call hit Grant's phone at 9:12 a.m. He brushed it off as routine paranoia from a client. The second call came at 9:17. The third at 9:19, each one angrier than the last. By 10 a.m., the CEO of PrimeLogic was shouting through the speakerphone so loudly that the receptionist outside Grant's office heard every word. A consultant named Kay Brooks found vulnerabilities your team swore didn't exist. We trusted you. You lied. Grant's throat tightened, though he forced out a calm response. There must be some misunderstanding. Our systems pass every audit. But PrimeLogic wasn't the only one. Within 2 hours, 4 more companies forwarded identical reports. Detailed, precise, irrefutable, each one revealing the cracks Grant had spent years painting over. Evan Cho burst into Grant's office, pale and sweating, holding a stack of printed emails. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Clients think we hid vulnerabilities from them." "Did we?" Grant snapped. "Of course we didn't. We just deprioritized them." Evan's stomach dropped. Deprioritized meant ignored. Ignored meant dangerous, and dangerous meant lawsuits. CEO complaints rolled in one after another, threats to cut contracts, demands for explanations, cold warnings that trust had been broken beyond repair. This wasn't a ripple of dissatisfaction. It was the first wave of a corporate collapse. Meanwhile, across the city, Ariana watched the chaos unfold through public breach alerts, forums, and private messages forwarded to her anonymous inbox. She didn't smile, not yet. She simply opened the next phase of her plan, a deeper scan, a more invasive assessment. She combed through Nova Systems' architecture the way a surgeon examines an infected wound. She didn't look for flaws. She looked for the flaws beneath the flaws. Systemic weaknesses. Nova Systems had ignored for months, maybe years, and the deeper she dug, the clearer the truth became. It wasn't just one vulnerability. It wasn't 10. It was 23. 23 critical security failures that Nova Systems had patched only on paper, logged only in theory, and buried under layers of corporate denial. Ariana mapped them all, building a dossier so complete and so damning that no executive, no engineer, no board member would be able to defend what Nova Systems had allowed to fester. As the sun dipped below the Seattle skyline, Ariana sat back in her chair, exhausted, steady, powerful. The girl they thought they could silence with 3 suspension emails was now unraveling an empire with nothing but her mind and a laptop older than most interns. And at Nova Systems headquarters, Grant Aldridge finally felt the first true tremor of fear. Not because a system had crashed, not because a client was angry, but because somewhere out there, someone he had underestimated was now dismantling his world piece by calculated piece. And she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The collapse didn't begin with an explosion. It began with silence. A silence so sharp, so unnatural, that everyone inside Nova Systems felt it before they understood it. 12 major corporate clients terminated their contracts within a single 24-hour window. 12. For a tech giant, that number wasn't a warning. It was a death sentence. Executives rushed through the hallways with their phones pressed to their ears, voices trembling as they tried to salvage relationships already beyond repair. Department leads yelled orders that no one could follow. Engineers stared at their screens as if sheer willpower could reverse the damage. But the truth was already out, and the damage was irreversible. Across the office, Grant Aldridge sat frozen behind his desk, surrounded by printed cancellation notices, each one citing the same reason. Critical vulnerabilities uncovered by an independent audit. Vulnerabilities he swore did not exist. Vulnerabilities he had dismissed, minimized, or buried. His empire, built on image and intimidation, was cracking beneath him. And then came the email, from Mina Lee, sent to every employee in the company. Subject line, Integrity Matters. She detailed everything. Grant sabotaging Ariana's income, Grant lying to clients, Grant refusing to fix system weaknesses, and the recording that captured his bragging in his own words. The email spread through Nova Systems like a wildfire that had been waiting years for a spark. Employees whispered, screenshots leaked, journalists pounced. By noon, tech media outlets across Seattle were broadcasting the story. Headlines called it negligence, discrimination, abuse of power. Reporters swarmed the lobby. Investors demanded answers, and for the first time, Grant Aldridge realized he wasn't fighting rumors. He was fighting evidence. Evidence Ariana now held. Late that afternoon, the elevator doors to Nova Systems slid open with a soft chime. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Fingers hovered motionless over keyboards. Every head turned. Ariana Brooks stepped out, dressed in a sleek black suit that transformed her from the girl they had dismissed into someone impossible to underestimate. To her left walked an attorney, to her right a journalist, and behind her the quiet, steady presence of Mina Lee. Grant's heartbeat stumbled at the sight. He rose from his chair as Ariana approached the conference room, the same room where she once stood, dripping rainwater, mocked for daring to speak. This time, the room fell silent for a very different reason. Ariana set her laptop on the table, calm, controlled. She typed a few commands and projected the findings across the screen. 23 critical vulnerabilities. Each one explained clearly, each one supported by logs, timestamps, and internal documentation Nova Systems had failed to address. The board members paled. Engineers exchanged horrified glances. Grant tried to speak, but Ariana lifted a hand, silencing him without raising her voice. "You dismissed me as a nobody," she said, her tone even, unshaken. "Someone who didn't belong in your world. Someone who should have stayed in her lane." She turned the screen toward the executives. But talent has no race, no neighborhood, no title, and arrogance has a cost. The attorney beside her stepped forward, outlining the legal consequences: potential class action lawsuits, defamation claims, discriminatory retaliation, millions in client damages, $8 million in losses and counting. Grant sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face as the weight of his downfall pressed down on him. The man who once controlled an empire with a single command now couldn't control the tremor in his hands. Ariana closed her laptop with quiet finality. What she said next was not a shout, not a threat. It was a truth spoken with the calm certainty of someone who had earned her place through fire. "Now you understand, Mr. Aldridge, talent has no color. But your arrogance, that comes with a price." She turned and walked out of the conference room as every camera followed her, every whisper rising in her wake. And behind her, Grant Aldridge sat alone in the ruins of his career, realizing too late that the woman he tried to crush had just rewritten the rules of the world he thought he owned. 1 year later, the skyline of Seattle looked different from the windows of the 21st floor. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the height. Or maybe it was because Ariana Brooks was no longer staring at it as a delivery driver dreaming in the dark, but as the founder and CEO of SentinelCode Labs, one of the fastest-rising cybersecurity firms in the country. Her office wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. Floor-to-ceiling windows washed the room in silver daylight. The hum of servers drifted faintly from the labs below, and the soft murmur of engineers collaborating filled the air with purpose. 45 employees now worked under her leadership, 45 brilliant minds, many of whom had once been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside by the same corporate ecosystem that tried to silence Ariana. People with accents, unconventional backgrounds, community college degrees, career gaps, or stories of being told they would never make it. At SentinelCode Labs, they weren't just hired, they were valued. And right beside Ariana, reviewing proposals on a glass tablet, was Mina Lee, now the company's chief operating officer. Calm, precise, unshakable. The partnership that began in a tiny Capitol Hill coffee shop had grown into a leadership duo the industry called quietly unstoppable. Early that afternoon, Marilyn stepped into the office carrying a small tray of coffee, moving with steadier steps than she had in years. Her treatment had gone better than doctors predicted, and for the first time in a long time, hope sat on her shoulders without the weight of fear. "You've built something incredible, sweetheart," she said, placing a cup on Ariana's desk, her voice warm, strong. Ariana smiled, not the tired smile of a girl fighting to stay afloat, but the full, confident smile of a woman who had stepped into her own power and refused to dim it for anyone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Grant Aldridge was waking up to a very different reality. His luxury penthouse was long gone, sold to cover mounting legal fees. He now lived in a small, outdated studio apartment with peeling paint and a window that overlooked an alley rather than the skyline he once felt entitled to. Job applications came back unanswered. Tech conferences no longer extended invitations. Recruiters avoided him. Not because he had made a mistake, but because the industry had watched the recordings, seen the reports, and understood everything Ariana had exposed. For the first time in his life, Grant was judged not by the power he wielded, but by the harm he had caused, and the consequences were his alone to carry. Back at SentinelCode Labs, Ariana stood at the window, watching the city pulse below her. Employees passed by her open office door with easy smiles, exchanging ideas, collaborating on solutions, building things that would change the world without tearing anyone down in the process. Mina stepped beside her. We just signed 3 new contracts, and another former Nova Systems client wants to switch to us after your keynote last week." Ariana nodded quietly, absorbing the significance without gloating. She wasn't driven by revenge anymore. She had outgrown that fire. What she carried now was something steadier, something deeper, a belief rooted not in anger, but in justice. "You know," Mina said softly, "most people would have walked away after everything Grant did, but you turned it into something bigger, something that matters." Ariana looked back out at the city, her voice low but certain. "The best justice isn't destroying the people who tried to break you. It's proving they never had the power to define you." She paused, her reflection framed against the skyline that once seemed impossibly distant. "Talent shows up in every neighborhood," she continued, "in apartments with leaking ceilings, in people working double shifts, in voices no one listens to until it's too late. The real failure is when the world assumes genius only grows where privilege does." Mina smiled. "And you proved them wrong." "No," Ariana said, turning back to her desk. "We proved it together." The phone on her desk buzzed with a new request, an invitation to speak at the National Technology Summit, the same event Grant Aldridge once dominated year after year. Only now, he wasn't even on the guest list. She accepted with a single tap. As she walked toward the conference room to meet her team, one thing became undeniably clear. Ariana Brooks had become more than a success story. She had become a symbol, a beacon for every underestimated mind, every unheard voice, every outsider told they weren't enough. And in the halls of SentinelCode Labs, surrounded by people who had finally found a place where their brilliance could breathe, Ariana Brooks wasn't just legendary. She was proof. Proof that justice, when guided by integrity and courage, doesn't just restore what was lost. It builds something greater than anyone ever expected. Ariana stood by the window long after the office lights dimmed, watching the Seattle skyline flicker against the night. A year ago, she had looked at this same city from a very different place, with very different fears. Back then, she was a girl fighting to survive inside a system that refused to make room for her. Now, she was someone who had built a system of her own, one that lifted people instead of crushing them, one that opened doors instead of locking them. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, but the words carried a weight earned through every battle she had endured. If the world won't protect you, then you build a world that will. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it was truth, and the truth was undeniable. The very man who tried to destroy her, who mocked her, sabotaged her, dismissed her brilliance because of where she came from, had unknowingly set in motion the rise of the most respected cybersecurity company in the region. His attempt to silence her had amplified her voice. His effort to break her had carved out the path she needed to rise higher than he could ever imagine. She stepped back from the window, her reflection merging with the lights of the city she now helped safeguard. "The greatest victory isn't making your enemies suffer," she said softly. "It's achieving something so extraordinary that they finally see how small they were when they tried to diminish you." Her words hung in the air like a final quiet anthem, a lesson, a warning, a promise. And as the camera pulls back, fading into the glow of SentinelCode Labs, her story becomes something larger than one woman's fight. It becomes a reminder that brilliance can come from anywhere, that justice isn't given, it's built. And that the underdog rises not through luck, but through the courage to keep moving when the world tries to force them to kneel. If you believe in stories where justice finds its way back to those who deserve it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment so Black Soul Stories can bring you more extraordinary journeys just like this one.